Hello and welcome to today's lesson, Factoring in 3 Easy Steps. Now, there's a bunch of different types of factoring problems, but we can put them all together and deal with them in one system, okay, if we learn and work through the process of the 3 easy steps that I'll show you here today. Now, step one with factoring, you want to look for and divide out any common factors in your quadratic equation. So when we're looking through, sometimes the common factors are real easy to notice. If I look here, I have a 2, an 8, and a 6. Okay, they are all divisible by 2. And when I divide that value out, I need to put it in front. And then I complete the division. 2 divided by 2 is 1x squared. Negative 8 divided by 2 minus 4x. Positive 6 divided by 2 is plus 3. Okay, so I factored out that value. Some of your quadratics are not going to be factorable. If I look at 3, 14, and 15, there are no values that I can pull out of those three that would work for all of them. I can get some to work for some and not others, but it has to work for all of the values. Now, we look at another one here. We've got a simple value. I know I can pull out at least a 2, but I'm going to try 6 as well. So I can divide both of these by 6. The 6, once again, is out in front. 6 divided by 6, 1x squared. 96 divided by 6 is 16. Okay, so we're pulling out these common values. They're important values because they stretch or shrink a graph, they flip a graph, but it also makes our factoring a lot easier by pulling these values out in the first place. Now, the most common factor that students miss is the -1 common factor. We always want our x squared function to be positive. Okay, so if we have a negative in front of our equation, we want to pull that -1 out. We put it in front, so that's a vertical reflection of our graph. And now all of my values will change signs. So I have -1 divided by -1, -3 divided by -1, and positive 10 divided by -1. Once again, it's going to give us an equation that's easier to graph and work off of for the rest of our factoring. Okay, now this bottom one is what I call our best case scenario. Okay, we've got a common factor here that we can pull out, and once we're done, this problem is actually going to be finished for us. Okay, so I look at, and I can divide both of those numbers by a -3 because I want my x squared to be positive. But we have to remember, a common factor doesn't have to be a number. It can also be a variable. So I can divide an x out of both of these values. So when I pull out the -3x, we want to see what's left. The -3's divide out. X squared divided by x is x. The x's divide out, and 24 divided by -3 is a -8. And what happens is this problem is actually done after pulling out the common factor. How do I know that it's finished? Both of my x variables have a exponent of 1. Okay, so if all you're left with is exponent of 1 variables, you cannot factor any further from that point. Okay, so that is step 1. Okay, so our step 1 is dividing out any common factors. Make sure that you put that value in front so it's not lost as a part of the process. Okay, so now we're going to copy these guys up. Okay, drop them on to our next step. Okay, because notice we've lost one. One's already taken care of with that first step. So now we've got 4 types of problems that we're going to look at, and we're going to work through step 2. Okay, so now step 2, we want to identify our A, B, and C values and list the factors of A and C. Okay, now identifying all three is important because if we cannot factor this, we'll have to use quadratic formula to be able to find our intercepts. Okay, so what we're looking for, A is the number of x squareds, B is the number of x's, and C is your constant variable in the n. Okay, so we want to identify those three values, and I'm going to move this guy out of the way here so we get a little more room. Once we've identified, we want to list the factors. And when I list my factors, the one thing I do that's a little bit different, I actually keep the x squared as a part of it. So what are the factors of x squared? X times x. That's the only way I can make an x squared. What are the factors of 10? I'm not worried about the sign yet. I'm only worried about the number. 1 and 10, 2 and 5. Those are my only options. Okay, now I move over to my next equation over here. Okay, A is 1, B is -4, C is +3. Factors of A, x and x. That's the only way I can get an x squared. And my factors of C are 3 and 1. That's the only way I can get a 3. Okay, now, when we come down and look at this bottom equation, I can see that I have 1x squared, but I only have a -16. That's C. This is A. Where is B? Okay, there is no B in this function, and sometimes there won't be a B. Okay, but we want to list and identify that value. Okay, and what we do is we say that there are 0 x's in that situation. Okay, and then we just work through our steps. Listing my factors of A, I have x times x is x squared. Listing my factors of C, 1 and 16, 2 and 8, 4 and 4. Okay, and then we've got the last of our 4 problems. Okay, this one's going to give us a little more work. Okay, once again, A, B, and C. So we have all 3 values. We're working with our A value, listing factors of 3x squared. So I need a 3x and an x. Factors of 15. I have a 1 and a 15, a 3 and a 5. Okay, so I've listed out all of those values. And that is step 2. Okay, so in step 2, we want to identify our A, B, and C value, because worst case scenario, we're going to have to go right to quadratic formula, and we need those 3 numbers for it. Okay, and then best case scenario, we've got our factors that we can work with to solve the situation. Okay, so we're going to copy these over. To our step 3. Okay, so there's my first 2. I'm going to go grab those second 2, and then we're going to finish our factoring here. Okay, and give myself plenty of room. Okay, so now, to finish your factoring, what we have to do is we've got our factors of A, factors of C, and like step 3 talks about, we want to build and test. And when we test, what we do is we call checking our inside-outside loop to make sure that the values are working properly. Okay, so when we factor, we need our 2-factor pairs. Okay, the x's are my first value in each pair, and I've got 2 options for my second pairing. And then you just want to look and see, what am I trying to build? We're trying to build that middle B value. So how can I build a +3? I can't use 1 and 10. I have to use 2 and 5. Okay, so now my inside loop is a 2x. my outside loop, so if you're thinking about FOIL, first, outside, inside, last, we already know our first and our last are taken care of, so all we have to look for here is to make sure our inside-outside loop works. Now, how can I build a plus 3 out of a 2 and a 5? I need a plus 5 and a minus 2. And now that tells me the signs that I'm going to use to place on my values. So now I know that I've got my plus 2, or my minus 2 and my plus 5 gives me my middle term. X times x gives me my x squared. And negative 2 times positive 5 gives me the negative 10. So this factoring is now finished. Okay, looking at our next problem over here. Okay, we have to bring the 2 down in front. We can't forget that common value if we pull it out. We've got x and x. They get split 1 each. Okay, and I have a 3 and a 1. So there's actually no real choice here because both of them are prime values, so they just have one simple factor. The only thing I have to do is work through my inside-outside loop to make sure that I'm making the middle term that I'm looking for. So if I've got a 3 and a 1 and I want to make a negative 4, I need a negative 3 and a negative 1. So I've got negative, negative, and now I've verified that I've factored it correctly. Negative 3x plus negative 1x is negative 4x. X times x is x squared. Negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3. Okay, and I have factored that equation. Okay, now just a couple left, and then we're finishing up here. Okay, now when we look at this third example, okay, the important part, remember, we're building a middle term of a positive 0. I've got my 6 out in front. I've got my x's that split into my 2 first terms. And what you always think about is when I'm looking at these 3 values, how can I work to build the middle term I'm looking for? And the only way I can build 0 is if I am equal but opposite. So now I didn't even check the inside-outside loop here, but I will do it quick with the values that I've already come up with. Okay, to get that 0 middle term, we have to be equal but opposite values to get that to work for us overall. Okay, now, our last problem is the one that usually causes the most difficulty. Okay, now we don't have just an x and x in front, okay, but we have a 3x and an x. So we have to split those into our 2 factors, and now we're just going to have to be a little bit more careful when we're working to build our middle term. Okay, so I'm going to work with the 3 and 5, see if I can use the 3 and 5 to get something that I'm looking for here. So I place the 3 and 5 in, and this is where it is, guess and check. I've guessed an order. I'm using my inside-outside loop. I've got a 3x and a 15x, and I can't make 14 out of these 2 numbers. So I know that that order is wrong. Now, I don't want to jump to 1 and 15 yet until I flip the 5 and the 3. That's the important part when you've got a number in front of one of your x values. You want to make sure you flip your numbers around and test it both ways. So my inside loop is a 5x, my outside loop is a 9x. Can I build a 14 out of that? Yes. I need a plus and a plus to finish that up. So now, once you've finished factoring, they usually ask one more question, so we'll touch on that quick here. They'll ask for the solutions or x-intercepts. Okay, when you're asked for solutions or x-intercepts, what you have to do is take each of your factor pieces, set it equal to 0, and then solve for the x value. Minus 5 from both sides, 3x equals minus 5, and divide by 3. You know, these are the ones that always end up getting students right here, you know, because they're so used to the shortcut. And the shortcut comes from a factor like this, and the fact that it solves so easy. Okay, x plus 3 equals 0. Oh, x is negative 3. All I have to do is change the sign on that second number. Doesn't work every time. Okay, make sure you're paying close attention. Take the entire factor, set it equal to 0, and solve. Okay, so that is our lesson for today, factoring in 3 easy steps. Thanks.